lessons of the Austrian economic school, motherfuckers.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading floor of the Merc, he's fought for every dollar he's ever earned. And now, with personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Shaun Thompson. And this is the Shaun Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white,
It's true, Squirrel. Youngest and the richest country in history with the highest quality of life. And capitalism is by far the best economic system any country could adopt, but moreover, the one all countries must adopt. So capitalism is 90% of it all. But what is capitalism? It's property rights. It's propertyism. It doesn't exist without law. That's why when someone's an officer of the court, it's a big deal. It used to be before our country devolved into a third world mafia ghetto, especially in Democrat areas. And that's why when you hear a story about a judge getting stooped in her office, it's more than just hysterical, which it is. Get some!
Federal judge and a high-ranking Atlanta police official are at the center of explosive allegations.
It involves sexual encounters inside the judge's chambers during work hours.
One court clerk testified to hearing what was described as unsettling noises, kissing, and music coming from the judge's chamber.
Better be Teddy Pendergrass, or it's definitely going to be a felony. It might be one anyway. Do you know why I learned that, Squirrel? Because I follow a good lawyer, officer of the court, man of character and integrity. He wouldn't dirty himself by living in a Democrat area. He's my fellow Floridian, Jack Smith, senior legal fellow for Heritage Foundation. Zack, how are you, Zack?
I'm doing well, Shaun. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Very good. You know, Zack, when you wrote the article, I first of all, I think it's just another example of low-living Democrats with titles. You know, we had a Mayor Daley who I don't think could read, couldn't pass the bar. He had some scallywag take it for him in private session. He became a lawyer, and they use it pretty much for a license to steal. You've heard the jokes. But the reality is, a lawyer is supposed to be of a different standard, an officer of the court. You're supposed to stand for something. You're supposed to represent something. In particular, when you become a judge, well, that's supposed to be the big leagues, right? You're not supposed to be smuggling illegal aliens underneath your robe like that big fat slob built like Alfred Hitchcock in Wisconsin, let alone the other scandals we see. This is the second judge in a week. The other one had to admit in front of a court that she, yes, was sleeping with the receiver of the court. It's pathetic what we're living through, isn't it?
Well, look, Shaun, the allegations are actually far more troubling than you alluded to. Yes, they're very salacious, having sexual conduct in her office that's inappropriate, that her staff could hear. That's bad. She shouldn't do it. There's no doubt about that. But what's even worse in some ways is that when confronted with the allegations, she lied. And she didn't just lie once. She lied multiple times to multiple people who were investigating whether, in fact, she had broken her oath to uphold the rule of law, to follow the judicial code of conduct. She lied about it. And it wasn't until a formal committee had been appointed to investigate her conduct, it wasn't until that committee had begun its investigation, expended a lot of time, a lot of resources, that finally she retained counsel and admitted to her inappropriate conduct and that she had, in fact, lied at the outset. Now, as you mentioned, Shaun, I pointed out in an article I wrote, you can find it on my X feed, at TZ Smith, that's at TZ Smith. That's not just bad. That's not just a violation of the Judicial Code of Conduct. That is a federal felony offense. 18 U.S.C. 1001 makes it a crime to lie during the course of an investigation such as this judge was subject to. And so the only question to my mind is, will this judge have the decency and good sense to resign in disgrace, or will the House of Representatives be forced to begin impeachment proceedings?
You know, Zack, this is an interesting point, and it really traces back to the problem in our society, which is not specifically or exclusively a policy. It's the character of the people who implement the policy, the character of the people who oversee the policy. It's this fact that and you know, Zack, this is why after every one of these cases, after every one of these policies that becomes a money laundering scheme, the perpetrators, it should be known what their party affiliation is. I believe this is 100% Democrat and 80% Republican. But the people who are turning to the system of law, which is what the country is based in, and the enforcement of righteous law, deserve to know who the judges are in the areas they reside, because the oath doesn't mean anything, Zach, to a liar. A liar can never take an oath. It doesn't mean anything. They're pathological. And you see the candidate in Maine. Is he really different from the mayors of Chicago or New York or California? This is a party-exclusive problem. And to turn over our elections and the results, that's dumber than turning over the policies in the first place, isn't it?
Well, look, here's a couple of problematic things that have come out of this investigation, these revelations that have come out. The first is the federal judiciary that was tasked with conducting this investigation. Do you know what the penalty they imposed on this judge, Shaun? What they said should happen to her for engaging in inappropriate sexual conduct in her office, for lying to investigators, and then inappropriately attending a partisan political event for a district attorney that she was nominally friends with. Do you know what the committee tasked with investigating this said should happen? They said she should get a private reprimand where her name wouldn't even be publicly released. Now, to my mind, that is an insulting penalty for the admitted misconduct that this judge committed. The second thing I'll say, at least when this happened recently, something similar happened to a Republican-appointed judge, that judge resigned. He resigned because he knew if he didn't, he would be impeached. And so, again, it comes back to my original question, Shaun, why hasn't this judge already resigned? And if she won't resign, why haven't impeachment proceedings already begun?
So let me ask a question of the way in which I view it, too. It also, as far as I'm concerned, it disqualifies everything she resided over, every case.
Right.
If you are one of the people who have been a victim of this particular scallywag whore, I want the judgment thrown out. I want my case thrown out. This is supposed to be the officer of the court, the highest example of what happens in a proceeding, the person who resides over the integrity of evidence. She has none. She cannot do her job. She has proven herself unable to tell the truth. She can't represent it. I think every case that she resided over should be thrown out, and the people have a claim against the state, against the very institution that gave her this power.
Well, let's be clear, Shaun. This is a federal judge we're talking about. And so here's part of the problem with that private reprimand. Parties don't know formally who this individual, who this judge is, at least as part of this investigation. And so they don't even know whether they need to file motions to recuse, whether this judge would be improperly biased toward their claims. Now, there has been a lot of public reporting, a lot of speculation about who this judge is based on the facts that were released during the investigation. And so as a result of that public reporting, Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for the U.S. Civil Rights Division, actually filed a motion to recuse against the reported federal judge there in the Atlanta, Georgia area, because that judge, who was part of her admitted misconduct, inappropriately attended a partisan political fundraiser for a Democratic district attorney candidate. That judge is overseeing certain civil rights, certain election-related cases involving the Trump administration, involving the federal government. And so as a result of that, Harmeet Dillon, the Justice Department, filed this motion to recuse, and we'll have to wait and see what happens with it. But it certainly seems to me like the DOJ has a very strong case that this judge should, in fact, recuse herself.
So Fulton County is a laughingstock joke. Outside of Cook County, it could arguably be the number 2 most corrupt, incompetent county in America. The judge is riddled in scandal. The prison system riddled in scandal. Prison guards go to prison themselves because they were shooting music videos. It's truly sophomoric, juvenile way to live, and it's a Democrat regime. But if you look at these judges, we don't know. For example, this particular judge might have been one of the judges that threw out the election result challenges of 2020. And then you look at the other judges that resided over all the cases in the Trump issues, whether it's the schizophrenic who said he raped her 20-some, 30-some years ago, or it's the judge over the no plaintiff in the property insurance fraud case, of which there was no fraud. And you look at the relationships between the kids and the wives of these judges, all Democrats, all go back to Democrats. So when you take this in its total value and you step back from it and you think about what this case is with the settlement of the government and Trump and how the fund was going to be set up, I never liked that, not because I think the fund is illegitimate. I think he settled for short money. I think he should have went forward for the $10 billion. And now that you see, the evidence is clear, whether it's Mershon and his daughter that worked for Harris, or it's Boasberg and the daughter that worked for Harris, or it's this other schizophrenic, what's his name, Igroinen, or whatever the case, or this particular judge. And every judge that threw out the election challenging cases, because none of those cases were adjudicated, they were thrown out for standing and a variety of other trickery. Do you think he should, in fact, up it and make it $100 billion and go after all of it and make the government adjudicate the case in front of the people? It's better than an election. They can't steal this.
Well, look, I think we certainly haven't heard the last of the issues related to this fund, whether there may be alternative mechanisms available. We've seen DOJ saying that certain settlements may be available under something known as the Federal Tort Claims Act. But again, Shaun, there should be widespread bipartisan agreement that at a minimum, federal judges or any judge or any elected office holder should adhere to the truth, and that they cannot lie to investigators when those investigators are looking into potential misconduct. Keep in mind, 18 U.S.C. 1001 was freely and very aggressively used against Trump administration officials, Trump administration allies, is something this federal judge likely has to preside over. Cases involving charges being brought under this same statute that prohibits lying to federal investigators. And so if we are going to adhere to the rule of law, if we are going to say that everyone should be treated equally under the law, it's hard to imagine why this federal judge, at a minimum, should not be removed from office, if not criminally prosecuted for her conduct.
Well, personally, I hope she fights it, because I think she's revealing exactly what the allegations I make are, that this particular political party cannot have any legitimacy in any federal position, in any employment in the government. And when you think back to the Sunday show with Chuck Schumer, who bragged openly about who I believe was an illegitimate president, Joe Biden, who told the people, don't worry how the election turns out in 2024. We have 235 federal judges that we crammed through during the Biden years. That's why it's uberly important, in my opinion, to invalidate the election of 2020. What would the legal ramifications be if we go back and audit all of those ballots in Michigan and Arizona and Georgia and all of the contested areas in Pennsylvania and the rest of it? And in fact, that was proven to be an illegitimate presidency. Would those federal judges be null and void?
Well, look, I think at least for the immediate concern going forward prospectively, there are very important issues being litigated by this Justice Department in terms of getting access to voter rolls, getting access to information. I just mentioned Harmeet Dillon in charge of the Civil Rights Division at DOJ. She is affirmatively suing certain blue states to get access to their voter rolls to see if they are complying with federal law. And unfortunately, many of those blue states are fighting her. They're opposing the Justice Department's efforts to make sure that their voter rolls are accurate, they're up to date, and that they are in fact complying with federal law. And so prospectively, there is still a lot of work to be done. I say kudos to this Justice Department for pursuing those cases, for trying to make sure that some of the issues we've seen in the past are not going to be replicated again. But stay tuned, because there is still a lot of work to be done in this area.
How do you view, I mean, I'm offended, but then again, I had the pleasure of meeting Tina Peters. And I met Tina Peters at Mar-a-Lago when Dinesh D'Souza was releasing 2,000 Mules. And at that time, the case had been started against her, but it hadn't been adjudicated. And she was in Arizona. She had been an official. She had evidence she felt that would prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that the software and the ballots were fake and the rest of it. But the specificity of the case, I'm not privy to. But I do understand what happened afterwards. And I have to say, being from, Chicago, Illinois area, and you see these murderers back out on the streets, drug dealers, gang-banging scum. We've got ankle bracelets. I don't know how many of them you can't even find who are murderers, let alone the wretched. So we've got this system where the government releases predators over and over and over. And in my opinion, that's an absolute railroad job. Then when Trump wins, he gives her the pardon, and the guy keeps her in even more. What do you think about that in the grand scheme of law and the way it is supposed to work, and how she, in fact, in my opinion, was railroaded? Do you agree that she was railroaded? And is there any recourse outside of a fund being set up during a negotiation for her to sue the government? This problem we have is that the government is held harmless in any fault and any liability. And that to me is completely wrong.
Well, I think if we step back and look at this from the 40,000-foot perspective, Shaun, over the past several years, we really saw a weaponization of our criminal justice system in a way that was troubling, to put it mildly, more than troubling in many instances. And if you look at what happened, take the alternate electors in many states, there was precedent for the action that they took. It was a way to safeguard, have the ability to rectify still cast their votes in the Electoral College if, in fact, certain election results were overturned. And yet many of those alternate electors were criminally prosecuted for conduct that had ample historical precedent. Take on top of that, many on the left have taken this a step further. They're filing bar complaints. They're trying to take away the livelihood of lawyers who represented Donald Trump or who simply gave Donald Trump advice, even when those lawyers were acting in their official capacity as members of the Justice Department. Look at what happened in Jeff Clark in Washington, D.C. Look at what happened in John Eastman in California. Rudy. Yeah, Rudy as well. So there's this concerted effort to disbar, take away the ability of these officials to make a livelihood, to discourage other lawyers from taking on these types of cases. So, look, I think as a first issue, we have to get back to fairly and impartially applying the law. The Trump Justice Department, they've done a good job at moving back in that direction. There's still a lot more work to be done. But then in terms of a remedy, I think that is a conversation that's ongoing that needs to be had. Now, I will say typically actions for vindictive prosecution, for selective prosecution, those are very difficult cases to bring in a typical circumstances. But I will say, look at Donald Trump himself, for example. It's very rare that you have politicians, attorney generals campaigning on an explicit promise to prosecute one specific individual. And yet that is what has happened in Donald Trump's case. And so even though those cases are traditionally very hard to bring, this may be one of the rare exceptions where at least Donald Trump might have a much stronger case than ordinarily would be.
This has been such an outrage, such an exaggerated example of political weaponization and bias. There has to be some recourse against the honest American. For instance, in the event anybody is tried, they should have the right to know the political affiliation. After these last 4 years, every American needs and deserves to know the political affiliation of the judge in any case before them. Because this is something where you're not going to get. I don't think you can look at Rudy Giuliani's case, for example, and think anybody can get a fair trial before a Democrat judge and a Democrat area. And I would love to know, and I don't know if the verdict is, and we do not really know this specific judge's name in what we were originally talking about, the one who was listening to Teddy Pendergrass when she can't find her gavel. We don't really know her name, do we? She, for instance, might have been a judge that oversaw Rudy Giuliani's railroading and stripping of his assets and inability to put evidence forward. This might be her, correct?
Well, look, again, her name is being publicly reported, but she has not, this individual judge has not responded to requests for comment. But I think you raise an important point, Shaun. This is about fundamental fairness. This is confidence we as Americans should have in our justice system. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to restore that confidence, to restore that impartiality, to restore that equal treatment under the law. And again, at least in this specific case, I think a good first step would be for the House of Representatives to initiate impeachment proceedings if this judge does not resign from office.
Zack Smith, I love the fact you're willing to talk about it. You were one of the first people to write an article about it and the seriousness of it. And you're a Teddy Pendergrass fan, so I know how difficult it was for you to betray that love of Teddy Pendergrass and not recognize he's virtually impossible to listen to him and not get yourself in the mood. However, Zack, you stay serious and you stay on the law because we need good lawyers because you're greatly outnumbered. So thank you for always making time for me.
Thanks for having me on the show, Shaun. Good to talk with you.
You too. We'll be back with your calls and comments.
This is the Shaun Thompson Show on AM 560. The Answer.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, anxiety meds, everyone's on them. If you're a 50-year-old male, maybe a bit porky, and you may even have type 2 diabetes, $1 million of term insurance may only cost you about $200 a month. Call Term Provider. Speak with Big Lou at 800-555-2085. Big Lou will find a term life policy for you even if you have type 2 diabetes, are overweight, or have high blood pressure. Term Provider has helped thousands of people like you who think they can't afford term life insurance. To buy $1 million of affordable term life for you, all you need to do is call Big Lou at 800-555-2085. Lou will make sure the scales are tipped in your favor. Call 800-555-2085. Big Lou will answer your call and work to fit you into a term life policy that you can afford. Remember, Big Lou's like you. He's on meds too. Call 800-555-2085 or biglou.com.
If you want unlimited talk, text, and data on a super fast network, Big Wireless will sell it to you right now for as little as